So, today I want to talk about the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department putting out a search warrant against the very people responsible for its oversight. Yes, you did indeed hear that correctly. And if this sounds like a flagrant abuse of power and a conflict of interest, that's because it is. This is only the latest in a long line of corruption tied to Los Angeles Sheriff Alex Villanueva. Villanueva was originally elected by liberals to supposedly reform the sheriff's department that has been rife with corruption since its inception. We can see how that's turned out, especially as he's using his position to target the very people who are critical of him and tied to investigations and oversight on his department. So let's talk about what's happened thus far. Now, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department this past week put out a search warrant against County Supervisor Shelia Kuehl and Civilian Oversight Commissioner Patti Giggins. Kuehl has on numerous occasions called out the sheriff and even called for his resignation. Meanwhile, Giggins serves on a committee whose literal job it is to provide analysis and oversight of the sheriff's department's policies, practices, and procedures. It's worth noting that the sheriff actually ignored at least two subpoenas from the commission in relation to alleged deputy gangs in the LASD. Now, we have here an article where he flat out refuses to testify at a hearing on alleged deputy gangs within his department. Now, LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva has reversed course and decided against testifying about deputy gangs to the Civilian Oversight Commission, defying for a second time a subpoena from the panel. Now, in a letter to the panel's executive director sent in late July, Villanueva had decided against testifying because the commission refused to agree to a series of his demands, which included being able to preview all exhibits to be presented at the hearing, the ability to cross-examine other witnesses, and a, quote, neutral hearing officer. Now, it must be really great to be above the law and not have to answer to a subpoena in an investigation of your department. And to be able to make demands like this. That said, this isn't the main issue that we're focusing on today. Even with this information, the question remains, was the justification for these warrants justified, and does it really make sense that his department's overlooking it? Now, to go into that, if we look into all of this, an investigation was done involving possible corruption involving a contract between LA Metro and a local nonprofit. Now, the Sheriff's Department is investigating a contract between LA Metro and Peace Over Violence, an organization that Giggins is the group's executive director of. Now, Kuehl appointed Giggins to the original oversight panel that has been overseeing the Sheriff's Department and happens to be a supervisor and a member of the Metro Board. Now, so this looks like a conflict of interest on the surface. However, even if all of this is true, one would think that a third party would be required to investigate given the conflict of interest at play. Given that these two people who are so closely tied together and are tied to the Oversight Commission are, charging and looking into information about these deputy gangs, that any information that would involve an investigation where the sheriff's department had to look back would involve a third party of some sort. That just seems reasonable. And that's the first amongst a lot of different reasons why this kind of seems suspicious and actually seems rather unlikely to me. As a matter of fact, the county's district attorney's office said in a statement that prosecutors were actually not consulted or even aware of the search warrants that were served. In this case, because they didn't review the warrant beforehand, that the district attorney did not intend to defend it if challenged in court. Meanwhile, no prosecutor seems to be able to see the crime that Villanueva sees in the awarding of a Metro contract to the nonprofit organization that Giggins runs, Peace Over Violence, which is a sexual harassment hotline. Now, the district attorney rebuffed the sheriff department a year ago because the evidence it had compiled didn't amount to anything. The DA said in essence that there's no there. So basically what we're seeing here is that they tried to get an investigation done a year ago. The DA said there was nothing to go on and flat out shut it down. And now right before an election, Villanueva has come out and found supposed information that justifies it. But when we look more into it, we find a lot more beneath the surface. Now, going back to Peace Over Violence for a moment, it's also worth noting that this organization has served the LA community for at least 50 years, and Giggins was not appointed to her position until 1985. That means that this organization lasted and existed for a number of years before Giggins was even involved. It just seems it would be something that would be easy to just demonstrate proof of if it really was an issue, especially because the internal processes are easily discovered. Rather, this seems like a coordinated attack against a service that provided a hotline for domestic abuse victims and the person in charge of it who happens to be in the Oversight Committee. Now, coming back to the current situation for a moment, it's worth noting that in this warrant, they were searching specifically for data tied to bribery, which makes sense. You want to make sure that there's no bribery involved. Of course, again, there should be an oversight with a third party coming in and not the sheriff's department doing it. So this means that, of course, all of Patti Giggins' data connected to Peace Over Violence was confiscated. They also towed her car, by the way, which was not in the search warrant. And if that's not further evidence of harassment being involved, I don't know what is. That said, the data actually contains sensitive information of survivors of domestic violence. And while I can't prove it all, and I can't demonstrate evidence to back this up, I can only point to the LASD's history when I say this. I have suspicions and fears that they may have wanted to use that information for ulterior motives as well. So, what do I mean by this? Well, Sheriff Villanueva has a special unit that some refer to as a secret police, and they seem to like to target Villanueva's critics. So we have here that in reality, a group of 9 men and women make up a little-known team of investigators formed by Sheriff Alex Villanueva and other top sheriff's officials. Much of what they do by design is a mystery to the public and even to most within the department. But as some of the investigations handled by the team have come to light, a common thread has emerged. Their targets are outspoken critics of Villanueva and the department. The unit, named the Civil Rights and Public Integrity Detail, has pursued a long-running investigation into one of Villanueva's most vocal critics, LA County Inspector General Max Huntsman, another person who's responsible for the department's oversight, and others, despite the sheriff's officials being told by the FBI and state law enforcement officials that it appears no crimes had been committed, a senior sheriff's official had said. Meanwhile, when it comes to the community itself, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department frequently harasses the families of people they have killed, including taunting them at vigils, parking outside their homes, and following them and pulling them over for no reason. According to a new report by the National Lawyers Guild and the American Civil Liberties Union, the LA Sheriff's Department, which has faced national scrutiny for its corruption scandals and killings of Black and Latino men, has routinely retaliated against victims' relatives who speak out, the group said in a report released on Tuesday. Now, the report, also produced by Black Lives Matter LA and Central Community Service Organization, alleges that LASD deputies regularly drive by or park in front of families' homes and workplaces, and at times have taken photos or recorded them for no reason. Deputies have repeatedly pulled over relatives, searched their cars, and detained and arrested them without probable cause, allegedly in retaliation for their protests. And officers have shown up to vigils and family gatherings, at times mocking and laughing at them or threatening to arrest them, and have also damaged items at the memorial sites. Now, this is interesting because in the current investigation, the sheriff has called for an investigation of how Kuehl seemed to know about what was happening beforehand, because she had her lawyer present at the moment where the officers had arrived. Now, again, he's more interested in this circumstance of figuring out who the whistleblowers are than to actually figure out that there's a conflict of interest within his own department and that there might be corruption to the highest levels of his department, that is a big problem. Now, going further, this has even been spread into his department itself. In fact, dead rats have been left outside the homes of members of the LASD who are being seen as cooperative with investigations into the department itself. So, yeah, there's a lot going on here. Now, these deputy gangs that I've mentioned, they're tied to a lot of this. And they are a whole other topic that I can't even begin to fully cover in this video. But it's sufficient to say that certain pockets of the LASD are alleged to have formed a number of gangs that have terrorized the public and typically retaliated against whistleblowers. You know, the same type of behavior that Villanueva seems to want to protect by using his power and the power that the state affords him to protect his deputies and himself. It was these groups and actions that were being examined in the hearings by the Civilian Oversight Commission. Again, Giggins is one of 9 who are responsible for that. Now, if you want more information on these gangs, I highly recommend this website here, which is knockla.com, where they have a ton of information on the LASD gang affiliate database. They have numerous articles talking about the entire history. This is just a good resource and website to use. I'll link this down in the description below so that you can check it out at your leisure and be able to research more for what I'm not able to provide in this video. So, that said, we now have to talk about the connections tied to the judge who actually signed the warrant itself. Now, we have here that according to various media reports, the judge who signed this week's warrants, Craig Richmond, has a long-standing relationship with Sheriff's Detective Mark Lilienfeld, one of the lead detectives on the current investigation. Now, it's also worth noting that Lilienfeld is on Villanueva's public corruption unit, the same unit that's described by many as a secret police. Further, another judge is a little suspicious of this whole situation and has decided to investigate themselves. We have here that a Los Angeles Superior Court judge has ordered the Sheriff's Department to stop searching computers seized from LA Metro on Tuesday. In his order responding to a request from Metro, Judge William Ryan scheduled a hearing for next Thursday on the matter and says he wants several questions to be answered, which include why didn't the Sheriff's Department request for a search warrant disclosed to another judge, Eleanor Hunter, had already ruled on September 1st that she was going to appoint a special master to handle any documents seized from Metro. So yeah, they had already found a judge to potentially give a warrant, and had a special master, a third party, meant to look into and handle the documents seized from the organization. Now, Judge Hunter was going to require a special master, so why did the sheriff then immediately seek a different warrant from a different judge, who then made a decision to provide the warrant immediately? Further, how was it determined that the warrant application would be presented to Judge Craig Richmond, and by whom, especially given his connections involved? So, all of this reads extremely shady, and the saddest part of all of this is that, as I mentioned before, Villanueva originally claimed to be someone who was going to come in and reform this very same type of corruption. Now, we actually know that the Los Angeles Sheriff Alex Villanueva rode a wave of progressive energy to become the first Democrat and Spanish speaker to win the seat in more than a century. Now his party is having buyer's remorse. A campaign promise to reform a troubled department has given way to a 4 years of scandal, attacks on journalists, and conservative rhetoric around crime that has shocked Democrats and endeared him to the far-right media figures like Tucker Carlson. In fact, he's made appearances on Fox News, Newsmax, and One America News Network, and conservative views he's espoused there have made him a familiar face among right-wingers. Villanueva's adverse relationship with the media has led several outlets to compare him to former President Donald Trump. He's gone on multiple occasions talking about woke people and wokeness and how being woke is an issue. And Villanueva has also described himself as the first person in the nation at his level of law enforcement prominence to push back against the Black Lives Matter narrative back in 2020, which he didn't really explain what that was, but then he said that whole Antifa crowd didn't bother going into the sheriff's territory during the Black Lives Matter rallies held in the summer of 2020 because they knew what was waiting for them. So this is the kind of shift that he made where he started off sounding super progressive and then didn't even gradually shift. He just flat out shifted into very right-wing talking points to the fact that most of the votes that are coming for him in the upcoming election are presumed to be Republican. Now, while the corruption of Villanueva is the most recent and obvious example, it must be understood that this corruption has run through this department since its inception and is at the very core of the LASD. Now, the website that I had shown you talking about deputy gangs, that has a lot more information going into the details behind that history. But with Villanueva, he managed to convince liberals that this department could be reformed. And just look what's happened. It's time to accept the reality that this department itself is beyond reforming. There's no incentive for someone from within the system to come in and change the power structure, given that their power is tied to the very power structure itself. Worse yet is that the LASD is far from the only department like this. In fact, this is the norm. This type of cronyism and corruption is an all too common occurrence in police and sheriff's department. This is more of the rule than an anomaly. And it's only by moving towards abolishing the police that people will be able to rest easy knowing that deputy gangs are not harassing and killing people using the monopoly of violence from the state as their shield. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you so much for watching.